explain how honored I am to be up here today. 2 years ago, I was a youth volunteering at the breakfast. Last year, I was lucky enough to attend, and this year I'm up here speaking. Today, you'll be hearing my struggles into and out of homelessness. What I hope everyone can take away from this today is how easy the journey into homelessness can be, but how challenging the journey out is. Preparing for this speech has had me doing a lot of self-reflection, and it has allowed me to realize that change has been a pretty constant thing in my life. As a child, my mom and I moved around a lot, and I don't remember spending more than 3 years in a school before switching to a new one. Other than the constant moving, I would say I had a pretty normal upbringing. I did not grow up in a group home. I wasn't the victim of an addict or an abusive parent. I didn't have any difficulties in school. And if we ever struggled financially, my mom did a great job at hiding it because I never knew it. I think it's important to highlight that I had a normal upbringing because I think it shows that anyone can be 2 steps away from homelessness. As I look back on my teenage years, this is a cloudy time for me and it's really hard to pull memories from. But if you were to ask my family, they would probably tell you that I thought I already knew everything and that I thought I had all the answers. I was a rude kid. I was mad at the world. I didn't like confrontation or conflict, so to avoid that, I'd keep a lot of things to myself. My mom tried her best to keep me in line, but by this time she had another child, and with a 4-year-old in the home, maybe she just couldn't give me the attention that I might have needed. During my last 2 years at home, I was never a permanent fixture there. To simply put it, I couldn't follow rules. My mom had certain guidelines, like chores and a curfew, and I just wasn't willing to abide by it. So instead of staying at home and being a part of my family, I decided to look elsewhere. I would stay with my grandma or with my boyfriend when I could, and when I couldn't stay at either of those places, I would go back home. I was 18 years old the last time I left home, and I thought I had the world at my fingertips. But it didn't take me much time to realize that with all that freedom comes responsibility. I wasn't ready for that responsibility, though. So instead of flourishing, I failed. See, they teach you a lot of great things in school, like the Pythagorean theory or exactly how many syllables are in each line of a sonnet. But what they don't prepare you for is real life. At this time, I had just left home and was about to get an apartment with a girl I had just met. Side note, you should always know the people you are about to move in with before you move in with them. Potentially, this was my first mistake. In order to get this apartment, I had to go on Ontario Works, which was our welfare system here in London. I got my first few OW checks, and the last thing on my mind was the consequences of not paying rent, seeing as how I never learned to budget. That being said, I quickly found myself evicted. A couple weeks before eviction, I had met a girl named Jessica. She was a 16-year-old Crown ward, living on her own, and she told me I could stay on her couch. She had introduced me to her friends and taken me to a place called the YAC, which is an acronym for the Youth Action Center. The YAC is a drop-in center run by YOU. It is strictly for youth, a place where they can get a warm meal, necessities like toiletries, and resources around housing. But most importantly, the YAC is a place for you to meet other youth like you. And this is where I met my now good friend, Maddie.
So Courtney and I became friends at the Youth Action Center. Spent a little bit of time together with mutual friends, and that's where we kind of got comfortable with each other, talking to each other, and saying hi on the streets.
At this time, I was couch surfing and building my street kid rep. I know right now some of you are probably thinking, well, why didn't you just go home? The only answer I can give you right now is pride. Something I didn't mention before is my mom had me when she was 16 years old. Not only did she raise me by herself, she graduated high school and college and had always had a full-time job. I've always been immensely proud of my mother and believed that my success would only mean something if I too had struggled. And that's exactly what I did, for 5 fast but long years. I stayed at Jessica's for a little bit, and then with a couple other friends for a little bit, until I outstayed my welcome everywhere. I had to check into a homeless shelter. This can be a pretty scary process. Although when you hang out downtown, you see the homeless scattered everywhere, walking into a shelter, you are bombarded with bums. And I say bum because this is a term I would soon learn to identify myself with. If you don't know anyone, it can be a pretty intimidating process to even check in. But luckily, I had a few friends staying there, which eased the process. I still had to prove myself to everyone else, though. And proving myself meant proving they could trust me, proving that I had their backs, but most importantly, proving if they helped me, I would too help them. This wasn't hard for me, though, because these people seemed to have something that I always wanted, which was a close-knit group of friends. When you are homeless, everyone provides for your circle. If there are 5 of you and one of you has a cigarette, you all have a cigarette. If one of you has a joint, that joint makes it to everyone's hand. If a couple of you can scrounge up change for a hot and ready, then you share that hot and ready with your entire circle. There's a strong sense of share the wealth in the homeless community. And I feel like you see that less and less in everyday society, but I hope it's something that will always remain within me. Where this thinking can get you into trouble is when it comes to your living situation. Most of the time, if one person in your circle has a place to stay, you all stay there. This usually results in eviction quickly, and everyone is back out on the streets where they started. The streets are strange, because although they are cold, with drugs, violence, and sometimes even death, the sense of community makes them feel warm. Or that could have been the drugs. I guess I'll never know. You hear me joke about the drugs, but it is a very real problem. Many teens show up on the streets maybe have only tried pot, but you can bet almost every single kid will have experimented with harder drugs, if not succumb to a full-blown addiction, within their first 6 months of the streets. I think this is because everyone around you is using, and they seem to be fine to you, so you give it a try, almost to fit in with the crowd.
So when I was on the streets, I was bouncing around from different homeless shelters, couch surfing. I lived under a bridge for a winter with friends. And like Courtney expressed earlier, you do get a sense of family, a sense of community. And when all of your friends are drinking every single day under a bridge, that becomes your life. And it's very, very hard to say goodbye to that and say goodbye to everybody and start on your own again. When I got kicked out, I was alone. And then my circle expanded a little bit. But I knew quitting drinking and getting off the street would mean me saying goodbye to my family.
I lived this day-to-day street lifestyle for 5 years with my friends and boyfriend. I would go to the Yak daily for dinner, but only access YOU's main office, Career Services, once every few months. The reason why I would go to Career Services is because I knew they would help me not only find work, but build a suitable resume. I knew this was the help I needed. I would go to YOU every time the inner me was screaming, "It's time to change." I would meet up with an employment counselor, we would chat, build a resume, arrange another meeting, and then poof, I'd be gone. And you wouldn't hear from me for months until the inner me started screaming again. This was because in the hour or two I was out doing positive things for me, my social circle was still moving, and I hated the thought of missing out on something while I was gone. I also hated that when I tried to talk about my meetings, my friends didn't care to listen. This led me to believe that they did not want to see me do better. So I chose to stick by my friends because I wasn't ready to say goodbye. And I think I knew that once I started making positive changes, I would have to say goodbye. As I've stated before, change has always been a constant in my life. But for the first time, the fear of change had become paralyzing. I finally had roots somewhere. I finally had friends for years. I finally had a place I felt like I belonged. I always knew there was more in the cards for me, though, regardless how I felt. I remember the first night I ever spent with my ex. I told him, "I'm not going to be a bum forever. I don't know when I'm going to change, but one day I will be more than this, and I hope that you will be willing and ready to grow with me." Somewhere inside, I always knew I was destined for more, but I never expected things to move so fast once I did finally embrace change. When I was 23, I was at a community meal one night with my boyfriend, and I was looking around at all the faces in the dining hall, And the ones that were striking me were the ones of the women in their 50s and 60s. And all I could wonder is, how did these women get here? What happened in their lives that caused them to slip through the cracks? What caused them to still be on the streets? It was that night 3 years ago I made a promise to myself to change. I made a promise to myself to get off the streets, to get off assistance, but most importantly, I made a promise to myself to look in the mirror and be proud of the person staring back at me. I gave myself a deadline. I told 23-year-old me that if I didn't have myself together by the time I was 25, that I'd probably be on social assistance forever. And I knew I could do better than that. I got back in contact with YOU, and they told me about a 3-week-long workshop called the TEST program, Training for Employment Success. TEST would help me build a resume, teach me interview skills, and help me to be job ready. And although the program did help me with handing out resumes, it didn't get me anywhere, because the last relevant experience on my resume was 6 years prior. Employers never called me back. I quickly fell into the same routine I'd been comfortable in, meaning not doing much than searching for my next fix. In September of 2014, my friend Maddie told me about the cafe run by YOU and how it changed her life. I decided to try and move my future in the right direction again and asked my employment counselor about the opportunities offered at the You Made It Cafe.
So YOU definitely gave me, again, the means to grow. I wouldn't have known what I could do unless I had the opportunity to show what I could do. And I think everybody should have that chance and that opportunity. And because so many of us have been through the streets, getting our high school late, a lot of us needed that opportunity. And I knew how much it had helped me, and I just wanted everybody else to have that same chance to see their own potential.
The one thing I love about the employment counselors at YOU is as long as you're asking for the help, they're giving you that hand to hold. They don't judge you based on the times you failed. They don't hold against you how many times you said you were ready to change but didn't follow through. All that matters to them is that today you decided it was time. It was then I realized that if all these people who barely knew me weren't writing me off as a lost cause, then maybe it was time I stopped giving up on myself. I met with an employment counselor to discuss skills training opportunities at the You Made It Cafe. I learned it offered great fundamental kitchen experience with a chance to develop culinary skills. You get to learn customer service by working in the front of house. They also do Meals on Wheels caterings in the kitchen daily, so even though you are still working with food, you are learning skills that could help you on an assembly line. Within the first week of starting at the cafe, I was confident it was a place I would enjoy coming to every day. It was a scary but exciting experience for me, as I definitely wasn't familiar with the kitchen at all, unless it was to cook things like chicken nuggets or frozen pizza. I had never really drank coffee before, let alone made it. I had never fried an egg or thought about making a dish look pretty. The cafe taught me kitchen skills like proper warming and cooling processes, safe knife use, and portion sizing. But they also taught me a bunch of transferable skills like attention to detail, how to use a POS system, and helping with inventory. The cafe trains you in a way that gives you other options upon program completion. It gives you a place where you feel comfortable making mistakes. I think it's because their main goal is to train you, so it gives off quite the classroom feel. The chefs and cooks are great there too. Because they all have their own personalities, you take something special away from each of them. The You Made It Cafe will always feel like home to me, as it was the first place in my adult life that gave me the opportunity to shine. I think what I enjoyed most about the cafe was being able to work and eventually run the front of house. I love people and thoroughly enjoyed meeting my customers, new or reoccurring. I would play little games with myself, and if I noticed a face appearing regularly, I would try and memorize their order so that the minute they walked in, I could already have it rung up before they made it to the cash register. The only time this backfired on me is when my customers got spontaneous and wanted to try something new. I wanted my customers to know that they were valued, but I also wanted them to know the vision behind the product. So for example, when I would sell a jar of jam, I would remind the customer, this isn't just a jar of jam, this is an opportunity to save a youth's life. The best thing about learning and executing good customer service skills is you never know who's going to walk through that door. I met Angie my first or second shift at the cafe. She ordered what I later found out to be her usual. I didn't even know where to find the muffins on the POS system, so I awkwardly asked her to give me a second to go get help and to forgive me that I was new. Over the time I spent at the cafe, Angie had become one of my favorite customers, and I loved meeting her a couple times a week with her muffin and coffee. I didn't know it at the time that such a small impact in her morning routine would have such a big impact on my life.
It's funny to think that our relationship started with muffins. But I guess when I think about Courtney, I think about a young person in a workforce and just a skill set, a desire to grow, and maybe something that she wasn't aware of at the time, but networking is a very real thing in today's job market. And you don't forget good people. As an HR person, part of what I do is look to network with people in the community, with people in different industries or similar industries, and you remember good people. So regardless of what amount of time goes by, part of networking is remembering sort of, who people are, what they bring to the table, and when there's an opportunity to move forward, then that's when the relationship really begins to grow.
Angie offered me an entry-level file clerk position at her organization, Caniseed. I never thought I would work in finance. As much as I love my mom, I never wanted to follow in her footsteps. But I was at a point in my life where I thought I should say yes to every new opportunity. And I'm glad that I did. The day of the interview was a complete disaster. I had trouble printing off my resume and had to bring a new copy. I was running late and didn't have time to change into my interview outfit, so I showed up in acid-wash jeans. While being interviewed, I was scribbling out old information on my resume and adding in the correct information. Needless to say, I left this interview thinking I blew it. But Angie and my manager must have saw something in me, because they called me back, regardless of my choice of attire or my lateness. I've been working in insolvency for a little over a year now, and within that year I've been promoted from file clerk to insolvency administrator. I am using words and lingo that just a few months ago confused me. A few months in my job, one night I was out with a friend for drinks. We ended up meeting a girl there who also worked in finance. It wasn't long before we dove into a conversation about high interest rates. 20 minutes later, my friend pulled me aside and asked me very sternly to stop talking about things she could not understand. It was then that I realized everything I had been taught was sinking in.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed in my time of knowing Courtney is that she has a consistent ability to improve on her skill set. And I think that's a combination of things. It's inherently a desire or initiative, a desire to improve, combined with a willingness to be coached and looking toward others who maybe have a little more experience in a particular field or department and leaning on them for their expertise and saying, how can I do better or what more can I learn? In Courtney's time with Caniseed, she started with us in an entry-level position and absorbed, the environment and the knowledge of people around her. And within a very short period of time, she progressed her career to a very specialized role within the organization. So I think that, looking back, the skill set that I saw when she worked in the YOU Cafe was a skill set that was transferable. So having that desire to learn or that initiative and that willingness to want to do a little more than what you did the day before, or to do things a little better than how you previously learned, I think that that's something that's admirable and was certainly transferable into our work environment.
With this new job, I've had the opportunity to reclaim my independence. For the first time in years, I've had a chance to have a stable living environment. Up until then, I had not spent more than a couple months at a time in a steady location, either on a friend's couch, in a hotel, or my last resort when I had to go back to my mom's. My job also gave me a chance to meet new people, like my coworker and friend Terry, and finally feel strong enough to say goodbye to the last few toxic pieces of my life.
The reason I chose to invest some time in Courtney was purely instinct. We used to work in a different location where we ran across people on a day-to-day basis that were having issues, that were out on the street. And for the most part, I felt I could only help them in a short-term, minute-by-minute basis. I didn't have a lot of confidence I could do any more than that. But with Courtney being here every day, and most importantly with her having a desire to improve, I just felt that it was going to be worth my time to step in and help if I could.
Having this new support system gave me the means to finally close that chapter in my life. This included saying goodbye to some of my closest friends, my boyfriend, and my go-to coping mechanism, which was numbing with chemical substances. This has had to be my hardest journey to date. If you would have asked me even 2 years ago if me and my boyfriend would still be together, I would have no reservations that we would be. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. I will always love him, and always will, just like I'll always love my street friends. But if I continued to watch them deteriorate while I progressed forward, I would have begun to resent them, and that's not what I wanted. Life is still not perfect, and although my work life is going better than I could have ever imagined, the success can be pretty lonely for me. Growing up has required me to grow apart from others. Since this is the beginning of a new chapter, maybe I just have yet to meet my future friends. My present life is filled with unknowns. I don't know where I'll be in a year from now. Maybe I'll still be working in finance. Maybe I'll be working in social services. Maybe I'll be working in a field that I have yet to experience.
My hopes for Courtney for the future are that she develops what her strategy is towards her mid and long-term goals. You know, I think for me, I'm here to support her all along the way. And I know that, you know, as we often have different mindsets on where we want to go or what we want to do. And I think Courtney has so much opportunity and so much skill that, you know, the world's her oyster. So, you know, whatever I can do to support Courtney, I'm certainly there for her.
At 26 years old, I'm finally starting to love and embrace change. Instead of being ashamed of the life I led, I love being able to share my ideas and experiences on platforms like this. I hope that when you leave here today, you will remember that anyone can be 2 steps away from homelessness. And next time you see a youth in need, consider how you can help build them up, how we as a community can help build them up. That support could be what takes them 1 step away from being homeless. Embrace, build, grow.